The first phase of the Israel-Hamas hostage ceasefire agreement is set to expire. As discussions for a second phase of negotiations are also set to begin, the question remains, will diplomacy prevail or will conflict escalate once again? I'm Veronica Dudo. Let's find out.
This is In America Today from the Ticker News Studios in New York City.
The first phase of the Israel-Hamas ceasefire is coming to an end, with Hamas releasing 33 hostages, including 8 bodies, in exchange for nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners. While discussions for a second phase of negotiations are set to begin, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remains firm on his commitment to bring home all remaining hostages and eliminate Hamas's military and governing capabilities. The Trump administration is backing Israel's objectives. For more, we are joined by Jonathan Tobin, the editor-in-chief of the Jewish News Syndicate. Hello, welcome to the show.
Great to be back with you, Veronica.
So first, let's begin with the first phase of the ceasefire ending. What are the key challenges in moving to the second phase?
Well, the key challenge was just included in your setup, where you said that Israel's 2 goals are to get all the hostages out of Gaza and to ensure that Hamas doesn't remain in power. Well, the problem is those 2 goals are pretty much contradictory. And what has happened with the hostage release ceasefire deal is that Hamas has been strengthened. They've held these ceremonies, these bizarre, really deranged, disrespectful ceremonies with the release of the hostages and even the bodies of some of the slain hostages, who were murdered at Hamas's hands, and that has angered Israelis. It has made it clear that Hamas is an enemy that must be destroyed. But the political forces working on Netanyahu, his predicament is that he can't do anything to ensure that the remaining hostages, which are about 30, assuming that those 30 are still alive, that he doesn't want to ensure that they won't be released. He needs to get them out. But in order to do that, Hamas is going to insist that it is allowed to stay in power. That's the catch here. And and that's really the dilemma that Netanyahu faces, and that's where the American role in diplomacy will come in.
What role do you think the United States will have in all of this as it moves forward now under a new administration, of course, the Trump administration?
Well, there again, the Trump administration has endorsed the Israeli government's 2 main goals: get all the hostages out, make sure that Hamas is eradicated. And Trump has added his plans for the future of Gaza, in which he'd like to see Palestinians resettled elsewhere and Gaza turned into, well, Mar-a-Lago along the Mediterranean or not. But those goals are also contradictory, because the impulse of the Trump administration to want a ceasefire, to make sure that there's peace in the region, that he doesn't want more wars, that's integral to Trump's worldview. It's contradicted by the need to get rid of Hamas. And Trump is, on the one hand, pushed. I mean, this current ceasefire hostage deal was pretty much imposed on Israel by Trump and his Middle East ally Witkoff even before he took office. But at the same time, Trump is also saying that he's giving Netanyahu the green light to get rid of Hamas. Well, you can't do both. And at some point in the very near future, Netanyahu has to choose. And threading that needle will not be easy. Now, it's true that Trump kind of has his back here, but at some point or another, there's going to have to be a choice, because Hamas is not going to give up the hostages for its sole leverage in this. I mean, they are living at the mercy of Israel and the United States. Their criminal regime is still holding on by its fingernails, with the United States and Israel committed to their destruction. But as long as they hold on to hostages, as long as they can hold out the hope that hostages will be released, they stay in power in Gaza. And that's the dilemma that Israel and the United States faces. And the point is, if they allow Hamas in power, that's a victory for Iran. That is a defeat for Israel and the interests of the United States. But that's a tough thing to square with the need to get hostages out.
You laid out a case explaining how Hamas has been emboldened by all of this and, of course, remains in power and wants to. How likely is it then that Hamas and Israel could reach an agreement on further hostage releases?
I don't think it's entirely unlikely because both sides have an incentive to do some sort of deal. Netanyahu wants to get those hostages out. And in order to get the kind of deal or that he could live with, he's replaced the negotiator representing Israel, and he's put in his confidant, member of his cabinet, Ron Dermer, and taken out the sort of military and intelligence establishment figures that he doesn't trust. And Hamas also wants to stay alive, so they need some sort of deal. They can't blow up the deal themselves. But I think it's also clear that sooner or later, Israel will resume the war against Hamas because Israel cannot live with Hamas on its borders. And as much as there's pressure on Netanyahu to get hostages out, as much as Israelis are divided about what they think about Netanyahu and his continued hold on power, they're united from right to left in opposing the continued existence of Hamas and its hold on power there. As long as that is true, that is a deadly danger to Israel, as well as, and not just in Gaza, but in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, where Hamas has been active, seeking to create another front against Israel with Iran's help. And that is something that, again, Israel can't live with. So this is a real dilemma. Both sides will try to, I think, come up with some sort of interim, deal to make this happen. But sooner or later, it's going to blow up because the two sides' ultimate goals are contradictory. Israel can't live with Hamas in power. Hamas will never surrender its arms. They will never surrender control.
So, as you mentioned, Hamas wants their prisoners back, and of course, Israel wants the hostages and remains back. Beyond that, what leverage does each side have going into the next round of negotiations?
Israel's leverage is that it has the military power and the capability and the U.S. support, which it didn't have under Biden, to really do whatever it wants in Gaza. That's very clear. Hamas's sole leverage, as I said before, are the hostages. So long as they hold on to any living hostages, they're human shields that keep their existence there in Gaza, some sort of power. But again, these are mutually contradictory positions. Both sides will have to give, as they gave in the first phase of the deal, in order to keep this going. Netanyahu doesn't want the responsibility for ending negotiations because that would mean the death of those hostages. But at the same time, sooner or later, as I said, Israel is going to move against Hamas in Gaza. It will resume the war, and Hamas will be finished. And it will have American support to do it. It's just a question of when.
What role is the Trump administration playing in these upcoming negotiations, and how influential do you think the Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff has been?
Well, he has a lot of leverage and power there. If the United States wants to flex its muscles, Israel is going to not try to create any daylight between it and its sole superpower ally. That's clear. But it's also unclear what Witkoff's mandate is for this next phase of negotiations. Again, because Trump's instructions, Trump's instincts, just like Israel's, are contradictory. He wants there to be peace. He wants a ceasefire to continue. He wants hostages out. But he also doesn't want Hamas to remain in power. And again, those two positions can't be reconciled in the long run. There can be interim deals for some hostages, to keep our going for a few more weeks or even months. But in the end, Israel is going to do what it needs to do in Gaza. And it apparently has American support for that. And how Witkoff exercises his leverage in these talks is partly a measure of how ambivalent both Israel and the United States are about these contradictory impulses here. They can't reconcile them, but neither do they want these negotiations to end. But sooner or later, they will. That's the only thing I can tell you. It's not clear how Witkoff is going to pressure Israel. It would be great if he pressured Qatar, which is a financier for, along with Iran, of Hamas. But in the end, Hamas is not going to listen to anyone that tells it to surrender. So confrontation and the resumption of the war is inevitable. As I said, it's just a matter of when and how many lives can be saved before that happens.
Jonathan Tobin with the Jewish News Syndicate, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
This is Ticker. We'll be right back.